Hello, everyone. I'm Darrell Burton, one of the pastors here at Church of the Resurrection, and I am delighted to have with me today attorney LaRonna Saunders. LaRonna Saunders, we're going to talk about some things as it relates to the law in this interview. And so, you're both a civil attorney, criminal attorney, civil rights advocate, I should say, and a criminal attorney. The state of Kansas Board of Law Examiners operates under the supervision of the Kansas highest court, the Kansas Supreme Court. In order to practice law in the U.S., a student must obtain a Juris Doctorate degree, a JD. Law schools use candidates what's called the LSAT. And what is the LSAT? LSAT.
It's like your legal SAT.
Legal SAT scores as a factor when evaluating your application for admission. Ms. LaRonna Saunders, so you've passed the bar, which gives you the right to practice law in Kansas and Missouri. Thank you. Thank you for doing this interview with us today. And so I just asked, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me. I believe this forum, it's a necessary and relevant to what is going on today, so I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you. As you said, my name is LaRonna Saunders, and I am licensed in Kansas and Missouri. I've been practicing law for about 17 years. I've practiced at plaintiffs' firms, defense firms. I've done civil litigation, asbestos litigation, pharmaceutical litigation, criminal law, family law. I am currently a mediator. I mediate at federal agencies with the Federal Executive Board Shared Neutrals Program. So I'm familiar with all different aspects and areas of the law. I'm also a wife and a mother of 3 children. I have 2 African American sons. One's a young adult. So the issue is very relevant to what I experienced with him. And I have another son. He's a sophomore this year. And then I have a little girl who's 5 years old. I am very much involved in people's rights and justice. I believe in truth and justice, so I don't let my profession determine who I am. So being a lawyer, that's what I do, but I define what that looks like, and I'm about truth and justice. And if you have anything other than that, then I'm not the one to bring it to.
Okay.
But thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. Well, we want to get into some of the questions. What I have outlined here are what I would call problems and solutions as it relates to some of the legal questions that we have and that we wanted to discuss today. So it's something Dr. King said. One of his quotes, it says, life's most pressing and urgent question, what are you doing for others? This is what Dr. King, one of his quotes. And so what are we doing for others? And so I think right now this is very, very timely in having these discussions. But here's the problem. Question 1. Ms. LaRonna, there are so many stories about the criminal justice system that has impacted people of color and minorities in discriminatory ways. As a person of color and a lawyer, have you seen disparity in sentencing between black and white offenders, or have you experienced different treatment in your profession in the courthouse? And why do you think some people are treated different than others?
Right. Unfortunately, yes, I've seen the disparity. It's pretty prevalent. And not only the disparity, I think a bigger issue is not just the disparity in the criminal justice system, but it's the disparity of who gets put into that system. I've had conversations with several people that have said, well, the statistics are you have a lot of minorities or people of color in the system, and the issue starts with the way the law is applied and enforced. It's not necessarily applied and enforced the same way against my Caucasian brother and sisters as it is against people of color. So while they get a pass, we're put into the system at a young age. We're put into the system through the school system. You've probably heard of the school being a pipeline to prison.
Yes.
Yes.
If
a minority or a person of color, a child of color, acts out in school, they're more likely to be sent to juvenile, where my Caucasian brothers and sisters, they would get a pass or they're just having a bad day. So now we have two different paths, and we're filling this criminal justice system with our youth, people of color, and once you're in there, it's so hard to navigate. If you don't have an attorney, if you don't have the experience, you can't afford an attorney, so now the economic situation comes into play. So I really believe like the key point is to keeping the minorities or the people of color out of the system. If we can find a way to make that fair, that's the first start. Now, as far
well, you're going into my next question.
Okay,
It's the
I'm
solution.
sorry.
No, you're good.
Okay.
No, you're good. You know, and so I just wanted you to basically what you're starting to do is you've identified the problem,
yes, sir.
and ways people are treated differently in the legal community. So what are some of the solutions or suggestions that you have that can change this criminal system and to make it more equitable, you know, for all?
Okay, I'll tie the two together. I do want to say it's perception and awareness, and some people aren't aware that there is disparity in the criminal justice system. So I'm always drawn back to the Ferguson situation with Michael Brown, and the Department of Justice did a report, and in Ferguson they found out that although African Americans made up about 60% of the population, they were arrested 95% of the time.
Wow.
So any time, and if you want to see it, these are a lot of, like my Caucasian brothers and sisters, they don't see it because you're only 5% of having to deal with this criminal justice system. That's why you don't see it. But 95% of the time, that's saying something's wrong with the way this is being enforced. So, yes,
So
we
that's
systemic.
systemic.
It's
That's
a system. It's a system from the cop that interacts with the young person. It's a system because they can use their authority of the law to pull over people of color who are easily identifiable. That's the thing about race as opposed to any other protected class. You can tell a person of color from a distance. I can't necessarily tell if I'm looking at a man or woman from a distance. I don't know if you're pregnant from a distance. I might not know if you have a disability from a distance, but I know if you're a person of color from a distance. And so it's easier to target people of color, and the people enforcing this law or applying the law, arresting people of color, they're getting them in the system, and it's easy to do. So that's what makes it systemic. So solutions. The first I would say is a key piece is awareness. What you're doing today, what the church is doing today, what the young people that are protesting are doing today, we're raising awareness to this, because if you're that 5%, for instance, in the Ferguson report, if you're that 5%, you don't see it. You don't see this as a problem.
Right,
if you're the 95% that's living this, you're getting ticketed. I was just reading a report the other day where there were several young single mothers. They had parking tickets, fines, and the judge sentenced them to like a year and a half prison time. They were getting longer sentences than somebody that's convicted of negligent homicide because they're poor and they're people of color. So that's the system right there. And if it's not affecting you, if you're not the one getting sent to jail because you can't pay a parking ticket, then you don't see that there's a problem. So raising awareness of that, I mean, it has people at a point where you have to make a decision. Now I'm giving you the facts. You can no longer sit comfortably and deny that there's a situation. Do your research. Go look it up. The Department of Justice report, it's online. Go look it up. The report about the judges that issue harsher sentences to people of color, it's online. Go look it up. You're quarantined. Go look it up. You have plenty of time to look up, information. So
So the information is there.
the information is there.
out there. So
information is there.
these-
So this awareness,
so-
it's really key.
Yeah.
It's really key right now. So I think that's the first step to the solution. The second thing that's going to be important is the way you receive the information. For my Caucasian brothers and sisters, and I get it, you could be defensive at first. Some of them feel guilty. But once we work past that, and this would be my plea to them, I need you to work past that defensiveness. Don't deflect. Don't say, well, it happens to, white people too. That's not what we're addressing right now. That's deflecting, and that's not dealing with the issue. Don't say, it's the media spreading or, fanning racism. No, the media is raising awareness. Otherwise, you're comfortable in your homes and you don't even know that this has happened. the George Floyd situation. I'm sure we're going to talk about it, but if there had not been a camera, if that had not been recorded, if the media had not spread that, what would the story have been? Probably the cops would have said he resisted, and therefore that's why we had to use this techniques, and that's why he's dead. Because that happens all the time, right, until you have it on video, until the media shows it, and now it's in your face. So I just need people to please work past the defensiveness and the deflection and stay focused on the issue. The issue is we need to make sure that this encounter, our encounter with law enforcement, is fair. I heard one of my Caucasian attorneys had said it's not the system that's not fair, it's the people in the system. Okay, so if you want to do semantics, it's the system, but let's go with that. If it's the people in the system, then we need to get the people out the system that are racist. And so we have to hold them accountable. So another part of the solution is holding people accountable. Speak up. Everybody has to speak up. And this is not just a black-white thing. This is everybody has to speak up. Minorities, I can't count the number of times that I've had clients come to me and they're telling me some horrific incidents with discrimination or law enforcement. And I ask, well, what did you do? Who'd you tell? Because it's usually months, days, right, years later. Oh, I didn't say anything, or I didn't want to cause any trouble. No, the trouble's already here. We need you to speak up. So minorities, if you're experiencing this, speak up.
Speak up.
Get the name, and I'm sorry, I'm probably going into several of your questions.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's good. Speak up.
Speak up.
Let me get to another question.
Okay.
And so, problem, solution. Have you experienced racist comments or behaviors by others in your legal profession? Have you experienced that yourself?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Yes. Can you elaborate somewhat?
It doesn't, being an attorney or a professional or in management doesn't make me immune to it. If anything, I probably deal with it a little bit more because now I'm dealing with people that consider themselves educated, but they're ignorant. So I have a whole nother level of issues that I'm dealing with. And also, for me, just being dark complexioned, it's already another level of racism that I deal with and prejudices. Yes. So I encounter it all the time. For specifics in the legal career, I remember I was working at a plaintiff's firm. A guy called, he wanted a contract drafted. They sent his call to me. And so I'm asking questions. I'm trying to get more details about what he wants. And it just sounded shady. It sounded borderline illegal. And I'm like, you could probably find an attorney to try to make this legal, but it just felt wrong. Right. So like they say, everything that's lawful is not expedient. Everything that you can do legally doesn't make it right. And so as I'm asking him these questions, like, you sure? That sounds a little like misrepresenting. You sure you're wanting to do this? Of course, yes, this is what I want to do. And I want to make sure the person has to pay me even if they find out about it. And then he said, because you know how black people are. How? No, no, sir. Please tell me, how are black people? Because I guess he's clueless that he's talking to a black female. But he goes on to tell me, that they're shady and they're not going to pay. And I'm just thinking like, this is ignorance, because you're asking a black female to pretty much help you set up this black individual. So which one of us is being ignorant right now? But I mean, so it's little stuff like that. I'm dealing with it from the clients to other attorneys to the system, law enforcement. So it's prevalent, and yes, I do deal with it.
Absolutely. So, and what are some solutions or some suggestions that you would offer us to confront this racism or these kinds of attitudes?
Again, speaking up is a solution. So when you're dealing with racism, you have to, first of all, you have to know what racism is. Give us your definition. Racism what is where if you feel that a race is superior or that another race is inferior. And there's also a difference between racism and prejudice. And this is what I run into a lot. I hear people say, well, I'm not racist. I'm married to a black man, or I'm not racist, I'm married to a black woman, I have black friends, I voted for Obama. Like that doesn't make, you might not be racist. That means you might not feel that you're superior per se, but you could be prejudiced. You have biases, you have preconceived notions about a subset or a subgroup of the black community. So that means you could be married to a black woman, but when you see a black man walking down the street, you've prejudged him and you are defensive. You're ready to call the cops on him. That type of communication and that type of self-check is the first step to dealing with racism. You have to do a self-check, and everybody has to do it for themselves, even as African Americans.
Even people of color.
Even people of color. You have to, by all means. I hear like Hispanics. They could talk about Asians, and the Asians are talking about African Americans. And so we have this prejudice within our own race. You have African Americans that talk about African Americans.
Oh, yeah.
They talk about the different skin tones in African Americans. So you have the prejudice. I think it's across the board. Everybody needs to do a self-check. If your way of thinking starts with these people or those people, or you're putting people in classes or groups, you're being prejudiced, and you need to check yourself. Nobody can check you but you. So start with that. Self-check.
That's good. That's good. Here's another problem. As a question. So what is your understanding of the term anti-racist? And have you ever represented someone who was discriminated against? Have you ever,
Yes, sir.
dealt with discrimination?
Yes, sir. Anti-racist, that is being opposed to racism. And for me, to be opposed to it, that requires action. You have to take some action against it. It's not enough just to say, oh, I'm against racism, but you're sitting quietly by while your friends are making racist jokes. You're not anti-racist, you're complicit, and you're silent, and that makes you just as guilty as they are. So anti-racist, you're opposed to the everything it stands for. You're opposed to the belief that one race is superior and another race is inferior. Yes, I've handle discrimination cases. I am, like I mentioned, I mediate at federal agencies, and 80% of them are dealing with the discrimination cases. I do know that it's hard to defend those. It's a good way to bring change, because usually when you start dealing with people's money, you bring a lawsuit, they're going to lose money. People can regroup and try to get their act together really quick. But the steps and the hurdles that you have to go through in order to bring a claim like that, it's just not something that's readily available to people of color and people without the money to fund that. So
well, let me ask you, this is a solution on the other side. And so how can a person avoid discrimination lawsuit? What can a person do just to, I guess, keep from being sued?
Okay.
As it relates to a racial situation or something discriminatory?
I would suggest, for instance, like if you were a company or someone in management, diversity, not just diversity training, you need racism training is what they probably need to start doing, because you could do diversity and it's like, oh, I'm accepting your differences. No, but you're not dealing with the
underlying
racism there. So they need to have racism training. People have to be able to see themselves. And when you can see yourselves, it also would allow you to be open to other people's viewpoints, other people's way of life. I'll give you an example. When we walk into a building, how often do we stop and look around and say, oh, is this wheelchair accessible? Do they have the appropriate number of handicap spaces?
Well, not often at all.
Not often.
As you asked the question, I don't think I ever even paid attention.
Don't pay attention. And that's because it's not something we think about, because it's not something we're dealing with.
Right.
But let you be a person that needs that's a handicap
right.
or related to or a friend of,
Absolutely.
then you can see it a little bit more.
Yes.
So getting those relationships where it becomes personal, everybody dealing with themselves, being open to other people's things that people are going through, it will make you more sensitive, and it will make you start thinking about stuff as you see it.
That's a good point. Absolutely. I hadn't thought of it in that regard. So then if you start seeing people of color, just acknowledging and recognizing that people of color have a different sensitivity
Right.
of being exposed to discrimination and other things. Okay, so what is justice? This is a question. And is it the same for people of color? And who is responsible for administering justice to others?
Justice. Should be, in theory. By definition, it should be colorblind. It shouldn't be partial to color. But it is administered by people who see color. And like the example I just gave earlier about, being an officer and being able to see a person of color in a car hundreds of feet away, if I have a bias or a prejudice, it's not justice says it's wrong, but now I'm using my authority to be able to target or pull over people of color. So while justice could be colorblind, the people that are administering justice, the law enforcement officers that are interacting with people of color, they're not colorblind. They have their biases. They need self-checks. They need training. The prosecutors, the prosecutor that has their own biases, and when I see a certain name, I'm going to give a certain sentence. Just based off the name, I'm already judging what I think you are and what I think your background is. The judges.
And that happens?
It happens.
Sometimes?
It happens.
Yes.
It happens.
Based off a name?
Based off a name. If you look at it, and I don't want to give a name to be stereotypical, but
Right.
you could look at a name, and if it sounds like it's going to have a few syllables, they're in their mind. They're like, okay, I already know what you're about, or I know your background, and I'm going to prescribe this. This is what you're looking at. So you've got people that are administering justice that have the biases and their prejudices. So we have to have people hold them accountable.
So a solution, going to the solution,
Okay.
I mean, you're going right there, which
Yes,
is
sir.
great. So what can be done when justice, what can be done to make justice fair for all people? And when justice is administered unfairly in a discriminatory way, what can be done to help rectify that?
Right. I feel like people don't recognize the strength there is in numbers and the power they have by just speaking up. By bringing awareness to it, you're putting a light on something, it exposes it, more people have eyes on it now, things are going to change. Like we're in that type of environment now where if you expose it, people are going to try to change. Either they're going to try to change it and cover it, so you're not experiencing it as much, or they're just going to say, hey, I didn't know this was happening, let's address this. So the solution is people have to, other than self-check, they have to speak up. Hold people accountable. Don't let it go, oh, that's just how such and such is. No, it's wrong. Would you want somebody stopping your child and asking, do you live in the neighborhood? No, you wouldn't want that. So speak up about it. When it's brought to your attention, speak up about it.
Speak up about it.
So
speak up,
speaking
speak
up.
out. Yes.
Speak up.
We have to. That's what we're doing today. Hopefully, this will make a difference. A couple more questions.
Okay.
Now here's the problem: are police supposed to administer justice? Are they supposed to administer justice to unarmed suspects by placing a knee on a person's neck, using chokehold, or shooting an unarmed fleeing suspect?
No, sir. No. Even as you were saying that, I was just thinking about.
I saw you begin to shake your head.
Right.
You knew
I
where
was thinking
going.
of a
Yeah.
interview I seen with one of the police chiefs, and he was saying, in none of our training is there a technique where you're putting your knee on someone's neck. Like, we're not trained to do that. So no, they're not trained to do that. But then again, this proves the point of you're dealing with people. Police officers are people.
Yes.
Police officers have their own biases and prejudices. You have to hold them accountable. How do we hold them accountable? You speak up. You have to record. These days you have to record, because if there's no video and you try to say something about an officer, it's their word against yours. And there is a bias toward believing the officer off the jump. If you say, hey, this officer shot this...
So a jury and a judge, they give them the benefit of the doubt.
They're going to give him, they're giving
And
them
not
more
all
than the benefit.
officers behave like this,
Right.
we should add.
Right.
But they get the benefit of the
They're going to
of
get the
doubt.
benefit of the doubt. Whether it's not even jury, it's your
Just
people.
peers.
People.
Just
As soon as
peers.
you tell someone,
Yeah.
hey, the officer shot an unarmed black guy, what did the black guy do? No, why aren't we asking why
The
the
victim,
officer,
what
what
yeah.
made you pull your gun? Why are you pulling your gun? What escalated to the point where you felt the need to pull your gun? But we're not asking that. We automatically, what did he do?
What did the black guy do?
And even that question, I have a serious problem with that, because no matter what the person did, when do we execute people for stealing cigars? When do we execute people for resisting arrest? What sentencing guideline says we're giving them the death penalty? You resisted arrest. That's not a sentence.
That's not due process.
That's not due process.
Right.
Right.
That,
So
that person, yeah, it seemed like you become the judge, juror, and executioner.
Exactly.
You know, right there on the scene. So,
Exactly.
well, so a solution or suggestions for policing to avoid the brutal killing of an unarmed person of color. What would be the solution that you can offer to maybe some police
right.
be viewing this?
They need training as well. In addition to like a training on racism, but they need to know that there's a different perspective. And the same with the community, the people of color, they need to know there's a different perspective with law enforcement. For law enforcement, they're supposed to protect and serve. And if they don't, that's not the foremost fundamental foundation that they are taught, then they're already missing the mark. You're supposed to protect and to serve. But how do you protect people that you're scared of? So the system right there, that's set up for failure for people of color. Because if you're scared of African American males and you're thinking they're all gangsters and they're ready to shoot you, then you're not protecting and serving them. You're seeing them as a threat. But people of color, there are several law enforcement officers that are, they take their duty very seriously. They want to go home to their families. They want to protect the community. They're not biased or racist. They're just trying to do their job. So the people of color, you can't interact or have that interaction with law enforcement as you're already defensive or you're already giving them attitude when you don't know them. Just like you don't want them judging you, you can't judge them. Judge them by their character, judge them by their actions.
So each side should give each other the benefit of the doubt.
And they have to learn each other's perspective. And the only way that comes about is that community relations, having that conversation. If I was doing a training, which I plan on doing training for law enforcement, I would show them that when you see an African American male run, that doesn't mean he's guilty. When you're in survival mode, it's going to be fight or flight. Now, we know what happens if you fight. You're not going to make that. You might have a chance if you run. So that doesn't make them guilty of a crime just because they took off.
Yeah.
It's different for African American men.
Well, I can tell you from experience,
Yeah.
we run because we're afraid we're going to die.
Right.
I've
Yes. So they need to be aware of that.
right, absolutely, because I've run from the police as a small kid. Yeah, I was afraid. That's my lived experience is what I saw. So yeah, I was afraid I was going to die.
So sad.
Yeah, I know it. So, but as an attorney, have you been pulled over by the police? And if you were pulled over by the police, share with us, what did you say and what did you do?
Okay. So yes, like I said, I'm not immune. Being an attorney, I've been pulled over by the police several times. So one, when I was a young adult and I was speeding and the officer had a right to pull me over and that went fine like it was supposed to go. The other times when I was pulled over, it was usually when my husband was driving. And then we get pulled over and it's hard to prove, but you know it when you see it. And the reason they pulled us over because you see black people in a nice car and you're profiling or you're stereotyping. So when they come up to the car, their hands are on their gun. Do you come up to everybody's car with your hands on your gun, officer? No, you don't. So that's part of that bias and prejudice. So now you've already made us defensive. So you're walking to the car with your hands on your gun, and then when you see that we're not, I guess, who you thought we were, then you say, I'm gonna let you off with a warning. So we're supposed to be happy that you let us off with a warning when you should have never stopped us because you were profiling. So the way I deal with that, and
Yeah.
The way I deal with it.
Well, yeah, that's this.
Okay, did you
getting
want
to
to
the
read
solution,
that?
right? Yeah. So obviously, you know your rights as an attorney.
Yes.
But if a person is pulled over by the police, do you have any suggestions specifically for people of color, so the outcome that we experience won't be a lethal outcome for
Yes,
us?
sir.
What can we do?
Okay, I would give the same advice that I give to my sons. And that is always be respectful, be cordial. I know it's hard when you know someone pulled you over for no reason. It's hard to be respectful and it's hard to keep that cordial politeness. But I need you to do that because at that time, that's not the time to deal with right and wrong. That's not the time to go back and forth with the officer. So I tell my sons, and I would tell people of color,
Even if you know your rights.
if you know your rights, first, don't escalate it.
Yeah.
Do what you can to not escalate it because you never know who you have in the officer. Are you dealing with a racist or are you dealing with someone who just pulled you over because they really thought, like, I don't know, you were breaking one of the traffic violations? So be cordial and if they ask you for your name, they're probably going to ask you for your name, ID. You have a right not to do that. But if you don't give them your name, you also have to weigh the risk because you will probably get arrested for interfering with a police investigation because that's the law. The law backs them up. So if they're just asking, hey, a license or registration, you can not give that to them, but then it's escalating that. So what I would advise people, give them your name. And if they start asking questions, usually they will say, do you know why I pulled you over? Don't answer that. Don't answer it because you don't know who you're dealing with. You don't know how they're going to twist that. You don't have to answer that. Now, you have a right not to answer that. They should tell you why they pulled you over. No, officer, I don't know. Why did you pull me over? Why did you pull me over? So you have a right to ask the question. I would also advise, don't ask the question if you know you have an attitude. If you're already upset, it should not come off as, why did you pull me over? There's a right way to be right. So you can ask, why did you pull me over? You're wanting an understanding, not why did you pull me over and I'm accusing you and there's already this tension there.
It's tension, yes.
But at the end of the day, try to de-escalate. If you know you were wrongly pulled over, no, you don't have to ask questions. Do you live in the neighborhood? You don't have to answer that question. I have the right not to answer that question. Can I search your vehicle? I have the right not to let you search my vehicle.
Oh, wow. And those sounds like, those
Yeah.
are rights, but I'm just thinking, man, if I, was to say those things, I feel like that's going to escalate because the officers are going to think then I'm challenging that authority.
Right.
That's what it sounds like. And I'll be careful not to.
That's the catch, though.
Yes. I know my rights, but I have to be careful not to, I guess, assert those rights in certain situations because I don't know who I'm dealing with.
Exactly.
And that's the fear. I don't know who I'm dealing with because I've seen where, and we've all seen the videos where the person was complying, was being, respectful, and they still end up dead. The person ran and end up dead. So we in a catch-22. I don't know what to do. I'm just stuck one way or the other. But, I just, that's, was the final question that I had for you. But I do want to just say thank you for doing this interview with us and for shedding some light, I think, for the viewing audience, as it relates to, the criminal justice system and the process. And as an attorney, you've given me some insight in ways in which, I'm going to be mindful of, anytime I encounter police officers because, and I know it's not all police officers, but I just I don't know which ones. But here's what it says from a religious context. Our ability to love God and to love others as ourselves is dependent on our first accepting Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior, admitting we're sinners, believing that He died for us, confessing our sins, and having a desire to follow Him, which provides for our salvation and eternal life. Becoming more like Jesus enables us to love others as Jesus did, and so we can love our brothers and sisters, white, black, Hispanic, and others, just like Christ has loved us. And so I want to thank you for doing this interview with us today. And do you have anything else you'd like to share with the viewers?
I would. While I'm on the topic of how to interact with the police, I would urge the community to record. Don't interfere. because I don't want to see more people, ending up getting killed because they're trying to interfere. And I heard an attorney that was on the news. It was like, why didn't you intervene? That's not a smart move to intervene when police, they have the authority to carry loaded weapons. Do not intervene. Stay far enough away, record the situation. If it happens to be the officers that's causing this harm, you can call 911 again and ask to have a supervisor or the chief, have someone else come out to that scene. If the police are standing by, they're not doing their jobs according to what you're perceiving, call the 911 again and ask to have management, a supervisor come out. I would not suggest that you go intervene in the arrest. Without, now you're weighing your risk. You're taking a risk of things escalating very quickly and you possibly losing your life over intervening. So I do encourage people, when you see it, don't just walk by. In the George Floyd video, there were people that just walked by. Don't walk by. Don't be numb to the racism that's going on. Record it. You have a voice. Record it. Report it.
Record it. Report it.
Yes, sir.
Oh, that's awesome. I like that. Record it. Report it.
Yes, sir.
We're in some complicated times, but we serve a God of grace, a
Yes,
God of
we do.
love, and we're going to get through these times. Well,
I
thank
believe
you,
it.
Attorney LaRonna Saunders.
Thank
You're
you.
doing
Thank
great
you for
work.
having me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.